that comes along.
Okay, super. Good evening, everybody. I'm Barry, and on behalf of the Siska Offwater Committee, I'd like to introduce Michael Jackson tonight. Mike Jackson is a founding director and past president of Siska, as well as an active paddle leader and instructor for the club. In his spare time over the years, he has worked as a naturalist and expedition leader for several companies in Canada and the US, from the Arctic to the Galapagos and to the Antarctic. Tonight, Mike Jackson and Dennis McMillan, I believe, is joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, great. Hi, Dennis. So Dennis and Mike are going to talk tonight about marine birds, the marine birds that they see regularly in the waters and islands around Cadboro and Oak Bays. Mike sees 15 to 20 species on pretty much every paddle, and there are about 30 species to be seen regularly. They will present an illustrated talk about how to identify the species and share some of their sounds, as well as other interesting facts. As far as questions goes, feel free to ask questions on the chat line, and I'm sure Mike and Dennis are going to provide plenty of opportunity to ask questions as we go along as well. So thanks very much for joining us tonight, and over to you, Mike and Dennis.
Well, thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
First of all, it'd be great for Dennis to say a few words, because not everybody knows Dennis as well as I do, because Dennis used to be very much involved with the club.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so some of you may know me from when I was a club member a few years ago. I still do get out kayaking quite a bit, but ever since I went into a partnership with a friend 2 years ago on a 34-foot sailboat, I'm more likely to go kayaking in my 10-foot Pelican, which I can easily launch from the boat. But, you know, as a sea kayaker in the past, I really had no idea how much fun these little boats can be. They're so super stable, and you don't have to worry about dragging them up over the rocks. So it's been a whole new kayaking experience for me. Last year, I seriously got into bird watching and bird photography, and I found both the sailboat and the kayak are good platforms to work from. My kayak is, it has a 30-inch beam on it, which makes it very stable. It's got a big cockpit. It makes it easy to get at my camera equipment, my big camera equipment that I carry in a dry bag, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you know, even though I'm a novice bird watcher, the past year has been really great fun for me, learning about birds and getting to know some of the ones around here. And I've learned just a heck of a lot, especially with the help of people like Mike, who know so much about birds and the wildlife in general, and the wealth of information that I've been looking up on the internet. So all in all, it's been a really great hobby for COVID, for having a COVID year. I mean, you're outdoors and you're alone all the time. But tonight, later on in the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about equipment for bird watching and to share with you a few tips and resources that I've discovered in the past year. Okay, Mike, over to you.
All right. Okay. Let me do a quick, I think this is, hopefully that has shared the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yep. I see it, Mike.
Okay. So I think what we should do now is maybe ask you guys a few questions. Let me just see if I can go, oops, no. So it's time for some questions. So Alan, you want to bring up the first poll question?
Okay, and when I get the results, I may need to share that. We'll find out. Here's the first question. Can you see that?
No.
Okay,
no.
I need to share my screen.
Okay. Maybe I can.
If you can see the polls, maybe you can do it.
I will just try something here.
How about that?
There we go.
Yeah, you know.
That
Okay.
works.
Yeah.
So go ahead and answer that.
Well, and I'll let you decide when to cut the question off.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yep.
We'll end that and share the results. Those are the results if you can see them.
That's good. That's good. So,
okay.
you avid, lots of casual. Perfect.
And you want to go on to the next, Mike?
Yes, please. Yep.
Okay.
Very interesting, eh?
I'm going to do the next one here somehow. How about this one?
There we go. Yeah.
Almost always in your kayak?
But sometimes.
Okay, and again, that's pretty good. So we'll just see what kind of audience you have here, Mike.
That's great. Good. Thank you. That's perfect. And then I think there's two more questions that we can go through pretty quickly.
We'll go ahead to the next one, which is right here. Okay, and that's what that looks like.
Yep. No surprise that that's a bit less than binoculars.
And this is the tricky one, I think, isn't it?
Oh, maybe.
We've seen a marbled Murrelet, haven't we? Have we seen a marbled Murrelet?
Yes.
So Linda, your speaker, your microphone's on.
Oh.
Okay, I think that we've got just about everybody there. Oh, there you go.
That's good.
Maybe if you put up a picture of one, that would help.
Well, we'll see later. Yep.
We'll see some of those.
If you knew, you should know.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, so let's get started with the real presentation. So I'm going to use the term marine birds, basically to talk about birds that you see around the water. Some people talk about seabirds, which is a more specific group, but the group that I'm talking about includes everything from bald eagles to murrelets and cormorants and so on. And for obvious reasons, I've been spending a lot of time paddling around Cadboro Bay this last winter. And I pretty consistently see anywhere from 15 to 25 species on a paddle. And through that set of lists I've been doing, there's about 30 species that Dennis and I want to share with you. And I say I've been mostly exploring by kayak, but Dennis has been mostly exploring by sailboat. And Dennis's sailboat is a much, much better platform for photography. So most of the photos are Dennis's. I should also mention that two other people, Daniel Doneke and Liam Reagan, also let us use their photos for this presentation. So quite a few of the photos are theirs as well. So I thought I would share my bird list for the day before yesterday. This was Saturday afternoon. And just as an example, there's 15 species that I saw paddling around Cadboro Bay. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that just gives you an example of what you might see. That's actually on the low side for what I've been seeing. It was a pretty short paddle just around the inner Cadboro Bay. And one of the important things to remember is that Cadboro and Oak Bays are part of the Victoria Harbour Migratory Bird Sanctuary. And we are on a major migratory bird route. And at 2 times of the year, in the fall, September, October, and in the spring, March to April, there are a lot of migratory birds that come through. But on this talk, I'm going to be talking more about the resident birds that we see primarily in the winter. And you'll also notice that we have several ecological reserves in the area, the Jemmy Jones, Trial Island, Chain Islets. And then if any of you get around Chatham Discovery, the Griffin, and the Alpha Islets. And even though there's probably over 60 species of marine birds that we might encounter in the area, we're going to talk about the 30 or so most common. And I'm also going to be focusing on how they look in winter rather than how they look in summer, partly because many of them don't stay here for the summer. And here's just a nice little map of the migratory bird sanctuary. See, it includes all of the Inner Harbor and then Oak and Cadboro Bays to 10 Mile Point. So let's get started with what is probably our most common of the local ducks, or the local marine birds, and that's the bufflehead. And many of you may be familiar with All Buffleheads Day, which is around about October 15th, when basically buffleheads suddenly appear in our waters. They're virtually absent prior to that, and then after about October 15th, they're all over. And one of the things that you'll see on most of the slides that I show is you can probably see the sort of the bar chart that shows the monthly, or actually the week by week abundance of these birds through the year. And like many of the birds that we'll be talking about, buffleheads actually nest in tree cavities. So they fly inland in the summer months, in that part when they're not around Victoria, and they find trees to nest in. This is, what is this, Dennis?
Female bufflehead.
It's a female bufflehead, exactly. So you'll see as many of these as you will of the males. The males that we just saw were much more dramatic colored, but the females are all over and very abundant. And I would say one of the key things to notice about the bufflehead is that big, bright white patch on the head, as well as a very white body. There's another bird that has a bit of white on the head, which we'll talk about later, but this one really has that massive white head. And a couple of shots of them in flight. And onto the Harlequin duck. And again, you can see the Harlequin ducks are most common in the winter, but also still around all year long. And they're certainly the most colorful, I think, and the flamboyant of our local marine birds. And they have a bit of they have a pretty cool sound. And this, I'm hoping, will work for you guys. Everybody hear that pretty well? Mm-hmm. And to me, they are pretty much the most bathtub duck sounding bird. So, that's the Harlequin duck. On the right-hand side here, you can see both a male and a female. And around about now, we're starting to notice a lot of the birds are pairing up in the area. And one of the things about Harlequin ducks is that they actually like to breed in fast-flowing mountain rivers. So there's a similar bird in South America and the Andes called the torrent duck that is the same genus, but it's these are kind of mountain river birds, and then they spend the rest of the year on the ocean. And they really are just spectacularly colored birds. Here's a couple more of Dennis's shots of our local Harlequin ducks. So another duck that we see is called the long-tailed duck, and you'll see why in a minute. And it's also got a pretty neat sound, which I'll play for you in a minute. But a couple of the cool facts is that it's one of the deepest diving of the local seabirds. It can go up to 200 feet down as it feeds. And it spends a huge amount of its time underwater. And so let's see if this works for the sound. Can you hear that fairly well? So that's the long-tailed duck. And very often you hear that before you see them. And there's the long-tailed duck. That's a male long-tailed duck. And I generally find I see more of these on the outside of Chatham and Discovery, but I've also seen quite a few of them near Jimmy Jones and Flower and between there and Cattle Point as well. So they're quite common in the local area. This is the male and there's the female. And that's what we often see when we see long-tailed ducks, is them flying away. So another important local bird, the common goldeneye. And in this picture, you can see a male and two females. So the male's on the left. And it has this really obvious white patch on the cheek. And as you can see also, you know, in terms of its abundance, it's really a wintertime bird again. There's one in flight. But just to confuse things, there's another goldeneye, which is quite a bit less common, called Barrow's goldeneye. And these guys are long-lived, and they fly away and they nest up in the high alpine lakes area. And they have a slightly different head shape. And I'm just going to show you here. It's got quite a dramatically shaped head. And if you notice, the white patch on its cheek is kind of a scimitar or a crescent shaped. And there's another view of Barrow's goldeneye. And what do we have here? Can anybody tell me what we're seeing in this picture?
On the left of Barrow's goldeneye?
Yeah, there's a Barrow's on the left and a common on the right. There are slight differences. You can see the amount of white on the side, but this is one of each of the goldeneyes. Mm-hmm. So slightly bluer, less white on the wings. But that's how you tell the two goldeneyes. But it's the common goldeneye that I tend to see the most often. So another common local bird, the surf scoter. And you can see that surf scoters are around here all year long. Not quite as abundant in the summer, but they're still very much around. And they're diving for mussels and other invertebrates. And I think this will hopefully give you an idea of how they sound. The wings make an incredible noise. You guys able to hear that wing beat sound there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there's the surf scoter. It's got another pretty dramatic head. The males have this big white patch on the back of their head and a very colorful beak and quite a dramatically shaped head. And there's the female. And there's a group of them in flight. But we also have, just to confuse things, there's two other species of scoters. The white-winged scoter is relatively common, and probably the most obvious difference that you'll see is that kind of white eye patch on these guys, as well as when they fly, you'll see a white wing patch. And so the head shape is very much the same, but there's no white on the back of the head. There's a couple of white-winged scoters taking off, and you can really see the white on the wings there when they take off. So another of our abundant local birds, the hooded merganser. And I would say probably the first two birds that I see when I get onto the water in Cadboro Bay would be the bufflehead and then the hooded merganser. They can fly really fast. They're very agile swimmers. Most of these birds that we've looked at so far are diving down and feeding on invertebrates that they find on the bottom. And again, like some of the other ducks, they are tree hole nesters. So they fly away in the summer and nest in trees. Now, here is the other bird that has the white on the head, except that with the hooded merganser, if he can lower the crest down and the white almost disappears. So how do you tell these apart from the bufflehead? Probably the main difference is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the hooded merganser has brown on its side, whereas the bufflehead has white on its side. And so these two are males, and there's a female. There's another view of a male hooded merganser having something to eat. And you can see that there's a lot more black on the head. And there you can see a female and a male both in flight. Another of our important ones, the common mergansers, and it's a very, very widely spread bird, pretty much all the way across the Northern Hemisphere. And they're also known as sawbills because they have a very serrated bill, which helps them hang on to the fish. And I've seen them in Cadboro Bay in groups of up to 200, kind of flocking around and chasing small schools of fish as they go around the bay, and also a tree hole nester. So in the foreground, we've got female common mergansers, and in the back, there's a male. And have a look at this picture, because notice that the line between the head and the chest is very distinct. It's a very sharp line, and more on that later. There's a close-up of a male common merganser. And this is 3 mergansers in flight, but I don't know if anybody can tell me which is the odd one out and why. Feel free to open up your mic and say.
Is the middle one a female?
All 3 of them are female. But the middle one is different, isn't it?
Yeah. Is the middle one a juvenile?
No, the middle one is a female red-breasted merganser, which is the other species of merganser. So notice that the line between the head and the body is really distinct in the upper one and the lower one. And then in this middle one, it's a kind of a fairly continuous gradation. And that's a subtle difference between the red-breasted merganser and the common merganser. And I'll show you a couple more pictures. So they're not as common as the common merganser. And the males have a rusty patch on the chest that you'll see in a minute. And they also have no white on the upper throat. So let's have a look at some pictures here. So there's a male red-breasted merganser, and you'll notice that there's a lot of kind of rusty brown on the chest. And so if you see a merganser that has kind of dark on the chest, it's almost certainly a red-breasted merganser. And there's a female, and you can see no distinct kind of collar line like the other one. So if you see a merganser-like bird, and I know the mergansers are pretty common here. They have quite a distinctive outline. They're kind of a medium-sized duck. And if you see the distinct head to body mark, it's almost certainly a common merganser. And if it's not distinct, it's red-breasted. And there's that same picture again. So the top one and the bottom one are common mergansers. The middle one is a red-breasted. But other than that, they look pretty darn similar. And unless you get close enough to see them or take a picture, telling them apart is really, really hard. Canada geese, I think we don't really need to spend too much time on Canada geese, but we might as well just hear our friends. And Dennis found this important fact about them, that they're able to poop up to 1 kilo a day, which means they're probably eating an awful lot of vegetation as well. And they are pretty much around year round, though I noticed that around mid to late December, there were very few of them in our area, and then they came back in January. But there is a smaller species that looks very similar, called the cackling goose, and I don't know if you can compare the sound here. That's the sound of the cackling goose. That's a Canada goose. The Canada goose has a much more classic honk. And there's our old Canada geese. This is a pretty common sign around our bay in the spring. And I suspect that they'll be far more common this year on the Chatham and Discovery Islands with the absence of a wolf. So another group of birds, the grebes, and you'll notice just like so many of the birds that I've been talking about, they're pretty much not around in the summer. But the horned grebe I see pretty regularly in Cadboro Bay. It's a bit smaller than the western grebe, which is one that you can quite often see in Saanich Inlet. But this is what horned grebes in Cadboro Bay look like, taken from a distance. You'll notice that their neck is quite S-shaped. And you'll also notice that there's quite a bit of white on the front of the neck and then dark on the back. So a lot of getting used to the birds is kind of identifying the outlines and the shapes. And here's a pair of horned grebes in winter plumage, just sort of starting to display at the beginning of the season before they actually molt into their breeding plumage. Because when they go into their breeding plumage, they actually have these weird tufts, which is how they get the name of horned grebe. And there's a picture of a horned grebe in flight. So, I'm sure we've all heard this sound. That's one of the common loon sounds, and then those are probably, I think, the most Canadian bird sound there is. These are, they can be, a group of them is known as an asylum. I guess you're listening to them. But this is what the common loon looks like around here during the winter. Is that the bird that you recognize as a common loon? I don't think so. But I've put a little arrow there because I want you to notice that the white on the neck there kind of takes a little bit of a dip back towards the back of the neck. And you'll see what I mean by that a bit later. But these are common loons, and notice that the beak is quite stout, and also they are big birds. So a huge part of identifying birds is figuring out their size. And there's our classic lake common loon in summer plumage. The Pacific loon is also quite common around here, and I'll show you some pictures. It's actually the most abundant of the 5 loon species worldwide. It takes a huge amount of time to take off. Actually, all of the loons have a really hard time taking off from the water. And you'll see here, actually this picture doesn't show it very well, but this is a Pacific loon, and it's got a slightly daintier beak than the other one. And if you notice, there's no kind of almost neck ring. The common loon almost has a neck ring. And I don't know if you guys notice who took this photo. I don't know if Mark's on the call tonight, but this is taken by Mark Byrne, who was our treasurer our secretary for many, many years. And these are Pacific loons in summer plumage flying. And you can see they've got a beautiful gray head. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture, a really good close-up picture of them. So cormorants. Cormorants are probably, I think, the hardest group to clearly identify in our local waters. There's 3 different kinds, and 2 of them are relatively easy to identify, and the 3rd one is kind of hard. And unless you get a close look, it's really, really difficult. And you can see double-crested cormorants are around all year. And the thing to look for is this yellow and orange on the throat. They're called double-crested because they have 2 crests on their head that's only visible in breeding season. And when they're flying, they have a kinked neck, so there's a real obvious kink in the neck. And so there's double-crested cormorants, and that yellow on the beak and throat really stands out. And there you can see the white crest on the breeding plumage. And here you can just make out the yellow on the beak there as it's flying away. And there's a nice easy view. So if you can get a good view and see the obvious yellow bill, then you know that it's a double-crested cormorant. And it's the largest of the local cormorants. These guys are also very common around Victoria. In many parts of, I would say many of the areas that we paddle, pelagic cormorants are actually more common than either the double-crested or the Brandts. And notice that there's no orange on the throat, and they appear more green. I don't know if you can see in this picture, there's a bit of a green sheen to them. And they appear very dark and very green. And during the summer, one of the things that really tells them apart is that they have these white patches at the base of their tail, sort of almost like white breeches. So it's quite distinctive. So if you see a cormorant with white patches on its back, it's a pelagic cormorant. But you'll only see that during the summer. And here you can see a group of pelagic cormorants on one of the rocks over by Discovery. And again, you can kind of see that iridescent green. And notice that the bird is fundamentally all black. There's no yellow, no orange on the face or anything like that. They're also quite a bit smaller than the other cormorants, and they're kind of more slender necked. And then there's the Brandt's cormorant. And the Brandt's cormorant is the one that I have the hardest time identifying. It's thicker and bigger than the pelagic. In breeding season, which is not now, they have a blue patch on their throat, so we don't see that. And when they're flying, they have a straighter neck, which is, again, a little bit hard to see. And here, when I see this one, it doesn't really seem to have any obvious distinguishing characteristics. It's browner than the pelagic cormorant, and it's bigger than the pelagic cormorant, but it's not really obvious. So it doesn't have any kind of standout marks. There's what it looks like in breeding season. It has the obvious blue. So if you can see the blue, then you've definitely got a Brandt's cormorant. But on this picture, you can also see the yellow at the base of the neck, base of the beak. And that's something that if you can see that, it's definitely a Brandt's as well. And here you can see a Brandt's cormorant flying, and you can just make out the kind of yellow patch that's on the, I would almost call it the cheeks. And so that's one of the things that helps you tell them apart. So what do you think we have here? And I have to say, I think this is a pretty cool picture that Daniel caught. got.
So the one on the right has a yellow beak.
The one on the right has very obvious yellow on its beak, so it is
double crested.
Double crested. The one in the middle is bigger or smaller?
Smaller.
It's smaller, and it's really all dark, isn't it?
Pelagic.
That's the pelagic. And the one on the left, you can just make out a little bit of yellow or light colored under the beak there. And it's a generally browner bird, and that's a Brandt. That's actually all three species of local cormorants in one picture. But if you can tell the pelagic from the others, that's doing pretty well. And I would say I've only been really confident of identifying Brandt's cormorants about 4 or 5 times in the last year. Gulls. So the Glaucous-winged Gull is probably Victoria's most common marine bird because it's found all over town, on the water and off the water. And if you look at the bar chart there, you can see it's very abundant all year long. But just to make it really interesting for us, there are 28 species of gulls that are found in North America, 16 of them in British Columbia. And our local Glaucous-winged gull hybridizes with a bird called the Western gull to make a thing called the Olympic gull. And the bottom line is gulls can be really, really complicated. And this picture here is a fairly typical Glaucous-winged gull. And the Glaucous-winged gull has the red legs and the kind of light gray plumage. And you can see kind of light gray on the tail and light gray on the wings, as well as a red spot on the beak. What do you see different on this one? Anybody see anything? You see
black and red on its bill?
A bit of black and red on the beak, but also notice that the primary feathers, the wingtips, are much blacker than we had on the previous picture. Let me see if I can go back. You see that the previous picture is gray wingtips. This is almost certainly a Olympic gull hybrid. So if figuring those out appeals to you, spend time identifying gulls, but I find it really hard to tell them apart. And here's another one that it's either a Glaucous-winged gull or it's an Olympic gull or it's something like that. And yeah. Now there's another gull that we see quite often that is much, much easier to pick out. It's a much smaller bird, and it has yellow legs, which is good. And it's a group of gulls, surprisingly, is called a squabble of gulls. And notice here, it's a much daintier beak. There's no red spot on the beak. And I don't have this side by side with a glaucous-winged. That would be a good picture for you to get, Dennis, next time. But notice that it has very distinct black wingtips, yellow legs, and an all yellow beak. And there's the mew gull in flight. A couple of shots of it in flight. I would say it's about, the mew gull is probably about half to 2/3 of the size of a glaucous-winged gull. So it's quite a bit smaller. And when you're kayaking, the wingtips of the mew gull are quite distinct and very obviously black. Another gull that we see quite a bit during the summer and into the fall is this bird called the Heermann's gull, and it's a all gray gull, or mostly darker gray gull with a red beak and black legs, and that's Heermann's gull. with a couple of Glaucous/Olympic/something gulls. And just to make you realize that gulls are really nasty, those are gulls that can be seen in Victoria. I bought a book last year called Gulls Simplified, and I'm afraid it did not simplify gulls. Anyway, here's another local bird that you might have heard and seen, and so I'm going to try playing this guy. You hear that screeching call? I think this one as well. And probably this is one of the very familiar summer birds. This is the Pigeon Guillemot in summer plumage. And for me, the giveaway features on this guy, it's an all black bird with red feet and the most amazingly red gape. If it opens its mouth, you see this incredible red inside. But also, and on this picture, you can also see it, it has obvious white wing patches. And it's a pretty common bird throughout our summer. And you can see here, it's more abundant in the summer than it is in the winter. So this is what it looks like though in the winter. How are these the same bird? Go figure. These are Pigeon Guillemots in winter plumage, and about the only thing that seems to be kind of common between the two plumages are the white wing patches. And notice that the bird is generally white and gray, which makes it blend into the ocean very, very well, which I guess is good from avoiding predators. But it's pretty common to see these around this area at this time of year. In fact, I don't know if anybody can tell me what's in the background there. Maybe recognize
10 Mile Point.
That's 10 Mile Point, or actually Cadboro Point in the glass house. But the bird in the middle here is a Pigeon Guillemot in winter plumage. But one of the things that I've been noticing over the last few weeks is that quite a few of the Pigeon Guillemots are starting to change into their summer plumage. So they're going to become easier to recognize. The Rhinoceros Auklet is another important local bird. And there's a fancy name for the horny thing, and I can't remember what it is, but it does have a fancy name. And Rhinoceros Auklets are quite closely related to puffins. And you will often see Rhinoceros Auklets with multiple fish in their beaks, just like you would see with a puffin. And there is a Rhinoceros Auklet, and you can just make out its little horny rhino horn there. And they look a bit like flying footballs. They're very, very tubby when they're flying, rapid wing beats, but they are around all year. They're actually probably more common in the summer. I think I have so they are more common in the summer, but we do have them all winter. But in the winter, they don't have their horny thing on the beak, and they don't have their white lines on the face aren't as obvious.
Is there a difference between male and females?
Not that I'm aware of. So one of my favorite birds locally is the marbled murrelet, and you can see that it's around all year long. And it one of the neat things about it to me is that it nests in old growth forests, and this was one of the reasons used to protect old growth, coastal old growth, is that these birds actually need these big trees for their nesting sites. They're quite small, and they can be easily confused with another bird that I'm going to show you called the ancient murrelet. But unusually, its summer plumage is marbled brown, and that's how it gets its name. And it's brown because it needs to camouflage itself in the trees where it's nesting. And so this is what they look like at this time of year. So they're black and white. And notice that there's a lot of white on the neck. So hold that thought for a minute. A lot of white on the neck, and in many cases, the white goes all the way around the back of the head. And so this is a, what kind of bird?
Marbled murrelet.
Marbled murrelet, yes. So here's another shot of a marbled murrelet. Notice that the white is, it's got a very obvious white all over the front of its face and neck. And that's what a marbled murrelet looks like in the summer. It basically is the same shape, but it's all brown. And it's sort of a marbled brown. That's how it gets its name. Then we have the ancient murrelet. And I didn't mention that one of the things that I find easy or a bit of a help is when I'm seeing these murrelets, because they're kind of the smallest of the seabirds that we see around, and they're really only around in the winter. The marbled murrelets are typically in pairs, even in the winter, whereas the ancient murrelets are often in groups of 6 or 10 or 12, so in quite large groups. And they do kind of fly over the water like giant bumblebees, and they nest in burrows. So they nest on predator-free islands. There's quite a few of them in Haida Gwaii, for example, around the limestone islands. And that's what an ancient murrelet looks like close up. The beak is not quite as long or pointy as the marbled murrelet. And do you notice how much how much black there is on the throat? And so when you see these in the water, they tend to seem as if their head is mostly black, which is, for me, one of the key differences between them and the marbled murrelet. So here's a whole bunch of ancient murrelets in flight, and notice that the black is all the way around the head. And these were ancient murrelets around RV Waisi. And there, notice how much black there is on the neck. And the next picture I've got shows you the two species side by side. So on the left, we've got the ancient murrelet, and on the right, we've got the marbled murrelet. And hopefully that helps you identify your next murrelet. So there's murrelets, which are little murres. And so now we have the common murre, which is, again, similar to the Pigeon Guillemot. They're all part of the same family of diving birds called alcids. They actually swim underwater after their prey. It's a bit bigger than the Pigeon Guillemot, and it is a slightly different shaped head and beak. They can fly long distances to feed, and they are a bit like flying penguins. And let's see if I can play the sound here. Basically sounds like a racket. So there is a marbled murrelet, sorry, not a marbled murrelet. That's a common murre in winter. So how do I tell that from the other birds that I've seen? Yeah, notice there's a black line that comes down from the eye. The black is much, much more on top of the head. And when you compare this with the Pigeon Guillemot, and I can't remember if I put this as a comparison, but the Pigeon Guillemot is more kind of gray and splotchy, whereas this is a bit more distinct. And in the summertime, the common murres look much more like this. And I've also noticed that as of around now, a lot of the common murres are changing into their summer plumage. So a very distinct kind of all black head in the summer. And you can see their winter plumage there, summer plumage there. But even here, you can see that black line on the face. So that black line on the face that you can see here is one of the things to look for. It's also probably at least twice as big as a murrelet. Okay, oystercatchers. One of my favorite sounds on this coast. I'm sure many of you have heard that sound. The black oystercatchers are pretty common along our coast, and as you'll notice on the bar chart, they're slightly more abundant in the summer. And despite their name, they're mostly eating limpets and mussels and even clams. And I'm not sure if they ever eat oysters, but they're called oystercatchers all around the world. And they have probably the most minimal nest of any bird species I've seen. They literally just lay 2 eggs on the rocks. And the eggs hatch and the little baby oystercatchers start running around right away.
Mike, what time of year are they on those rocky beaches that we need to be careful as kayakers?
I would say starting around May. Basically, if you see oystercatchers on the beach in May, I would say steer away from those rocky beaches. Give them a nice wide berth. So there's our black oystercatcher. And nice group of black oystercatchers. Now over here, we've got another bird. Actually, the same bird that you saw there is a thing called a black turnstone. And they breed in northern Alaska, and then they come back and spend quite a bit of the winter months around down here. And they do actually turn their turnstones over, so their name is actually quite apt, unlike the oystercatcher. And their sound is quite distinct. So that's a sound that I hear quite often paddling along the shoreline around Cadboro Bay and also Chatham and Discovery. And so notice it's a fairly short-beaked plover, all dark on top, dark chest. That's what it looks like in flight. And then we have another quite common shorebird called the greater yellowlegs. And it is very difficult to distinguish a greater yellowlegs from a lesser yellowlegs. They're both actually very similar in size. The main difference is that the greater yellowlegs has a slightly or noticeably longer beak in relation to its head. The birds themselves are almost the same size. And in this picture, Dennis, you can't see the beaks anyway. So, but they are in fact greater yellowlegs. And I see these quite often around Cadboro Bay, the Yacht Club, and also Loon Bay. And I think I can play the call. That call is quite common as well. Hear that. So if you see this beak, would you say that beak is longer than the head? That's kind of what you want to look for, is if the beak appears to be noticeably longer than the head, it's almost certainly a greater yellowlegs. And if in doubt, it's probably a greater yellowlegs. They've got long yellow legs that stand out, and that call that you heard was pretty typical. Killdeer, and I'll just play that quickly. I've seen killdeer nesting right on the rocks in Cattle Point. They are quite common all over all year long. But I saw a whole bunch of them. I saw 4 of them today on the beach in Cadboro Bay. Some things that help you tell them apart: they have 2 very obvious dark rings around their neck. And what do we have in this picture?
On the right is the greater yellow legs.
On the right is a greater yellow legs.
Black Turnstone.
Black Turnstone, and obviously a killdeer in the middle. So that's good. I don't think we need too much help identifying bald eagles, but the eagles are, again, a very common coastal bird. And they have these huge nests. There's a huge nest just behind the yacht club, and several on the Chatham and Discovery Islands. And we often get large numbers of bald eagles, especially during salmon time around Greater Victoria. I would say most times that I paddle around Chatham and Discovery Islands, we see a few bald eagles. Great blue heron, they are tree nesters, and they're around here all year. And I'm fortunate in having about 10 great blue heron nests right across the street from my house. And you'll see them stalking their prey along the shores of Cadboro Bays and Oak Bays and Chatham and Discovery Islands. And you can see this kind of classic heron pose where they're just poised, waiting for a fish to make a wrong move. And it then becomes dinner or breakfast. Okay, and then we've got another common one that we'll see, and I'm sure you've heard this sound. So that's the sound of the belted kingfisher, and the male and the female are very colorful, and they're also ground nesters. There we go.
If the males are less colorful, do they sit on the eggs?
No. Well, I think they both sit on the eggs, but they don't. They're not sitting on them all the time, if that makes sense. Like some birds, like the phalaropes. And this one here, I think is. Oh, that's wrong sound. Anyway, so here are some turkey vultures. Actually, I'll go back to the picture here. So the turkey vultures we include in the marine birds because we often see them kayaking. They are a scavenger. They don't kill their own prey, and they're quite long-lived. And again, they are around all year in Greater Victoria, but they are most common during the summer. And here you can see an adult and a couple of juveniles. And when you see them flying like this, the primary wingtips spread out like that is a really obvious kind of giveaway that you're looking at vultures. And especially in the fall, during the September migration, we see a lot of these guys circling around, waiting for thermals so that they can fly south and cross the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Now, just go see here.
Is that the only vulture in BC?
Good question. I think so, but I'm not entirely sure. It's the only one that I've seen in BC. Now, before we go on to the next bit, oops, sorry, just need to go back here. I suspect that are there any questions? Yes. Maybe I should answer any questions before we, okay, I'm just gonna go back here. Okay. I'm just gonna go and see here. So I've got, thank you, Morley, for minute characteristics. But Morley is probably good at doing the archaeological details.
Allowed to heckle during that one.
Yeah, there you go. And we've got double-crested pelagic, yes. And the whistling noise when it flies. I think you're talking about the surf scoter. That's where the wings, the beating wings makes kind of a whistling noise. And I didn't actually put crows in this talk, but I should have, because I do consider them marine birds, crows and ravens, because you see them along the shore a lot and flying from island to island. Okay, what else have I got? Yeah, where's the white? So it's a good thing to look when you're seeing a duck. And in terms of trying to identify things, really try and look at the shape, and you'll start seeing differences in shapes of birds. And then start looking at, how do they hold their head? I've noticed, for example, that Pigeon Guillemots seem to have their head kind of tilted at about a 70-degree angle forward. So it's a bit of a help when they're when you're seeing them in the water. Mew gulls are small, yes. And yep, we see greater, most of these birds are pretty widespread. And actually most of them can be, a lot of them can be found in both North America and Europe. A good pocket guide for use in a kayak. I've used those Max laminated sheets before on my kayak, but I actually find that they're not really that good. And I find that I just look at birds and I try to remember as much as I can. And then when I get home, I look up in the bird books. I do have bird guides on my phone that I can look at as well if I have a break, but I haven't really found a guide that I actually use when I'm in the kayak.
The best guide is to go with somebody that knows more than you.
Yeah, that's a pretty good piece of advice. And pigeon guillemots in winter have red feet, yes. So that's a good point, Julie. So if you see a bird that looks a bit like a murre or a murrelet, and it takes off and you can see red feet, then it's a pigeon guillemot for sure. And there are some pied-billed grebes around. I haven't seen that. I don't think I've seen a pied-billed in Cadboro Bay this winter, but I'm sure there are some around. So any more questions about bird ID before we switch to Dennis, who's going to talk a little bit about photography and IDs? Yep. So Merlin ID. Yeah, that's probably one of the best apps that you can get for helping you ID birds. It's a great app because it has a kind of 5-step process. You say, where is the bird? What day is it? How big is it? And what colors can you see? And did you see it, in the air, in bushes, on the ground? And then Merlin gives you a whole bunch of choices to pick from. So highly recommend that app. But I think on to Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That was most informative. There's so much to learn. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about bird identification and what I use, and a few tips and hints of taking shots of birds from one of the boats, either the big boat, sailboat, or a kayak. So I use the camera on the left. It's a digital single lens reflex. It has a big zoom on it, 100 to 400 millimeter. And it's also got image stabilization, which I find quite useful on the boat, because it's very seldom that you get out in a boat anywhere and not have some sort of wave action that rocks you around. So I find that's good from shooting from the big boat. And on calm days, I take that one into the kayak but I don't take this one with me in the kayak when it's rough at all, because it's just going to get too wet. It's a fairly heavy lens. The whole thing weighs about 3.5 pounds. And compared to my compact here, which I often just throw in the boat when it's rough out, it weighs maybe 0.5 pound. So it's a lot more cumbersome. So that's my compact digital camera. I say that's good for shooting from the kayak. Binoculars, I carry a pair of 8x20s in the kayak all the time. I find them compact. Of course, they're not as good as the full-size 8x42s, which are useful in a bigger boat. The second number is the objective lens. That lets in the amount of light. So the bigger that number, the more light you're going to see, the brighter image you're going to get. But consequently, it's a lot bigger and heavier type of binoculars too. For new bird watchers, I just got something covering my slide here. Yeah, it's easier to identify the bird using a photograph later rather than trying to remember all its field markings. So I just take lots of shots of it and look at the details when I get home, and it makes it much easier. I think I've only been doing this for a year, but I think as I get better at identifying birds to Mike's level, I'll probably be able to get away with not taking so many photographs. Okay, next slide, Mike. Sorry. So boats and kayaks aren't usually stable, as you know, and most of the seabirds that we see around here are quite spooky. When I first started looking at birds or watching birds, I was surprised how spooky they are. I mean, even birds on land, unless they're common at your backyard feeder, or common gulls or crows that you see, you can seldom get closer than about 50 feet to a bird. So I found one good trick to looking at birds on the water is just to shut off the motor from on the sailboat and drift down on it. Or even if you're kayak, you got a bit of wind, just sort of drift down and get a lot closer to it. One of the good trips, probably the most important tip, is to use a high shutter speed for birds on the water. So if you use something like an 800th of a second or 1,000th of a second, you're going to get birds that are moving, you're going to freeze them, but you're also going to minimize the shake that you get from the rolling boat or the kayak. And if your camera, if you have the option to set the ISO on it, just set it to auto and let the camera decide what's best for that particular shutter speed that you use. I also found, especially with my compact camera, it can actually zoom to something like 40 times, but it's so difficult to take a picture when you're zoomed in that close because it just makes so much shake that you end up with a blurry picture. So I found if I'm shooting with that camera, it's a lot better to reduce the zoom and digitally zoom the photo later using some sort of software. The other thing you can do with most cameras nowadays is to take lots of pictures by holding down the shutter. So you need to set your camera into continuous or burst mode. And you can hold down the shutter and take, I don't know, up to about 10 pictures in one blast. That way you can be sure of getting the bird in a pose that's going to expose most of its identifying characteristics. And you can pick the one of the best ones. Okay, Mike? So as I said, it's best to look at your photos using post-processing software rather than trying to look at your phone or look at your camera viewfinder and check it out. Because you can often make the picture a lot clearer to aid in identification. So you can zoom in quite easily. You can adjust the exposure and the contrast, or you can sharpen the picture. I found with a lot of my pictures, especially when I'm taking the photo when it's rough out, the image stabilization on the big camera works really well, but if I don't have that on the small camera, I can somewhat sharpen the picture at home and get the details that I'm looking for. There's lots of software that's available for post-processing. Some of it's free. The CAS has been around for many years. It's a Google product. It's not supported anymore, but it's still an old standby, and I use that one for years. Photoscape X is another good one. It's good for your phone. There's a couple of paid apps out there, PhotoPad Image and Adobe Lightroom. I use Adobe Lightroom. I quite like it because it has a lot of good features on it for editing your photos, but also for managing your photo library. I also use a product called Topaz Sharpen AI for artificial intelligence, and it has a lot of smarts built into the software that helps you sharpen a photo. And it works most of the time, and it can really make blurry pictures visible. They also have a product called denoise. You know what denoise means? It means when you're shooting or noise means on a photograph, it means when you're shooting a picture at a really high ISO, level. You're going to get a lot of background blurriness or bubbles. And this product will get rid of the noise. Mike's got a couple of pictures on the next slide here that will show you what these can do. So this is an example of a high noise image. You can see on the duck's back there that it's quite unclear. It's because the pixels are really quite big and they're overlapping each other. So if you run it through one of the denoise pieces of software, like on the next slide here.
So before we go, do we know what kind of bird it is?
Goldeneye.
Yep, female goldeneye. Okay,
good.
Next slide.
So when you run the denoise on it here, you can see it's got rid of a lot of the fuzziness in the picture as far as the large pixels, the overlapping pixels. So the software actually goes through and it analyzes each pixel and its adjacent pixel and blends it in. Now, if you run it through the Sharpen AI, which is the next slide, right? You can see it really clears up the picture quite a bit. So what was in the first picture was quite unusable in some cases for identifying a bird. Now you've got something you can actually work with. So for bird identification, there's a number of books out there, but I think these 5 are probably the standards. I think the National Geographic Field Guide to Birds in North America is considered to be the Bible on birds. It's a great book. Detailed, it has nice drawings in them. It's really just a really easy one to get around in, I find too. Sibley's is another book that's widely used. It focuses on plumages of different age birds, different seasons. It's very detailed. I find it a little bit difficult because the small font. If I don't have my glasses on, I find it difficult to read a little bit. Most of the bird books, they actually have drawings rather than photographs in them. The reason being that with the drawings, you can depict the defining marks on the birds a lot easier than in a photograph. Plus, you can show what the bird looks like in its full plumage and when it's non-breeding seasons. So you find that most of the books have the bird identification in drawings. Another one that I use all the time is Peterson's Field Guide to Western Birds. So by focusing on Western birds, as say compared to the birds of North America, the National Geographic, which I think has about 800 different birds in it. In the Western birds one, you're limited down to I think 250, 300 birds. So for beginners, it's a lot easier to scan through the book and pick out the bird that you're looking for. There's a couple more books on the next slide here. The Golden Guides to Birds of North America. That one, I've had that one for quite some time, I guess maybe 20 years. It's my copy. It's really good for beginners. It's simple, well laid out, easy to pen through. National Audubon puts out a bird book as well. It has a lot more information on habitat, foraging, nesting. And this one actually uses photographs of birds. So rather than the drawings. So most of these books you can find on Amazon and you're able to scan through them and have a look or go down to your local bookstore and see which one works for you. Okay, Mike? Number of bird apps out there. The one that is probably commonly used by most people around the world is called eBird. So it has local hotspots. All the bar charts that Mike was showing in the photos came from eBird. You can manage your checklists on it, and you can set it up so that it sends you an alert when a rare bird is seen in the area. When I first started getting into birding here, I was just amazed at the number of people who are interested in birds. There was a blue jay, a rare blue jay out of the University of Victoria a few months ago. First time I responded to one of these alerts, I went out there on a Sunday morning thinking, oh, I'd be the only one out there. And there were like 15 people looking for this blue jay out there. Because it's quite rare in this area and everybody tries to get a photograph of those rare birds. All About Birds, that's the web version of Merlin, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So that helps you with identifying your bird by answering 5 different questions. So it'll give you a number of birds depending on how you answer the questions. I found the challenge about these 5 questions is deciding on what size the bird is. So sometimes you may have to hover between it's a duck size and a goose size in order to get, or a crow size and a goose size in order to get the bird right. MacaulayLibrary.org. It's been around since 1929. It has its median archive and it has literally probably a couple 100,000 photographs in there. And once you start getting used to using this one, you can zero in to a particular location and a time of year. And it also offers many other filters you can put on. So you can look for pictures that show an immature male eagle that's flying in Sydney area in the summertime. So that level of detail you can get to. So if you're really into zeroing in on birds, that's a great app for that. Audubon.org, again, that's a guide to over 800 different species of birds in North America. It has lots of details about feeding behavior, diets, eggs, and nests, and conservation. So that's a good source as well. Mike, next slide. Identify what bird. This one has many details and facts about birds. You can search by bird size, shape, color, etc. I feel for myself it's a little bit for advanced users, but I'm just getting into this birding in the last year, so maybe I'll grow into this one a little bit. There's a couple of other sites you can go to if you want help in identifying a bird. The Facebook group called What's This Bird, put out by the American, or sponsored by the American Birding Association. If you have a photograph of a bird, you can post it and get it identified. And they're usually really quick. It's almost like people are out there waiting for photographs to identify. I often get an answer from these people in 10 or 15 minutes. So it's quite a useful one. Locally, birding.bc.ca has all sorts of information about birding in BC. It's not so much for identifying birds, but it does have a useful forum, or again, you can post a bird picture and get it identified. Usually not as quick as the Facebook group, but you are getting local people who know the local nuances and bird identification around Victoria. So some of the phone or tablet apps that you can get, the first four are all free: eBird, Merlin, which Mike was talking about a little bit earlier, and asks you 5 questions. Audubon has some really nice photographs in it. Peterson Birds, I found that one's type of book, it's really easy to just pick up and flip through the pages, browse through. There's also Sibley Birds, which has really good drawings, but it comes with a price, it's about $27. And there's an old standard called iBird Pro Birds. Again, you have to pay $20 for this one. But I'd start with the first 4 and decide what works for you. And maybe if you really get into it, get one of the other apps, the paid apps. So any questions about the bird site or the identification section?
Dennis, some of us just use the little waterproof point and shoots. Your little camera, I think, is higher end than that from what you were saying with the telephoto. I find personally, if I just put it on the athlete setting, that seems to take care of the motion.
Sports mode. Most of those, sports mode. Most of those small cameras like that do that, yeah. So you can, you can have a landscape mode or a sports mode or a number of other modes.
The sports one seems to take care of the motion though.
Yeah, because it cranks up the shutter speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if people don't have more questions, I have questions for people. What do we see there?
Pelagic Cormorant.
Lots of cormorants.
Double crested? The one with a green sheen, but I can't remember which one that was.
Yeah, the green sheen one is Pelagic.
And you've got some double crested up top.
Notice that this is sorry. Right. These are. I'm getting a bit of echo. You can see we've got both Pelagic and Brandt there. More tricky bird ID. This one right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse.
Mhm.
That's very obviously which one.
The one with the orange beak.
Double crested.
Double crested.
And then this one here with the white cheeks. Oops, right. That's those are Brandts, and then these guys down here, the little guys are pelagic. So they're pretty tricky.
That looks like Mandarte Island.
Mm-hmm, it is. Yep.
It's double crested on the left.
I'm pretty sure it's a double crested on the left. And in the middle, I'm pretty sure that's a Brandt's.
Brandt, yeah.
And most of these other ones
Little pelagic
are the pelagics. That one there might be a Brandt's as well.
Yeah, and
It's
this is
a little hard to tell.
Yeah.
But and again, I think the important thing to remember is don't expect to be able to identify all the birds you see, even if you know what you're looking at, because they don't often show key features.
Doesn't one of them not fly over land? Like they'll go around an island?
I'd heard that, but I've forgotten which one it is. Which doesn't help me.
I've forgotten too. You have to ask Daniel, but there is one of them.
Yeah.
They will fly around Sydney Spit. They won't fly over it.
It's the one that lives up the gorge here, just near my place. And they all nest in a couple of trees there, but they fly right over the gorge to get in and out. They won't go over land. Can't remember which one it is though.
I think most of the ones on the gorge are the double crested. But, yeah. Anyway, I say there's lots of birds out there. I say any paddle, if you start paying attention, you should be able to see, 15 plus birds on a paddle, especially at this time of year. I think the birding is generally better in Victoria in the winter than it is in the summer. There's certainly more variety in the winter, because a lot of birds that nest up in the mountains and inland spend their winter feeding in the ocean where it's not frozen.
How do they raise their young if they're like one of the species was up at over 10,000 foot alpine lakes where I believe there's usually nothing living in the water in terms of fish or amphibians and that. How do they raise their young up there?
I think they're probably, I suspect that 10,000 feet is probably the highest elevation they've been recorded at, but they're probably more likely to be nesting 5,000–6,000 feet at more typical alpine lakes, which are again lower productivity, but still have some food. And I would say, yeah, they're probably, yeah, I don't know. They're not marine birds at that point. I had a question about cormorants drying their wings, so that it's very common to see cormorants drying their wings, and that's partly because they don't have the same oil in their feathers as other birds, and by being what's the word I'm looking for? By being less waterproof, they actually swim better, but it means they have to dry their feathers when they get out of the water, and that's why you'll see them. And even like the Galapagos flightless cormorant still has to dry its wings when it gets out of the water. Oh.
Mike, are there any golden eagles around this area, or am I just seeing immature bald eagles?
There was a golden eagle reported on the eBird Rare Bird Alert a few days ago.
Yeah, it was out in the Langford area, right?
Yeah.
One of the gravel pits or something, yeah.
Probably 80% sure that I saw a golden eagle on Discovery a few weeks ago, but I didn't take a picture of it, and yeah, I would have bet that it was a golden eagle, but I didn't report it as such because I wasn't 100% confident. Generally a bit bigger, different shaped head, very feathery legs compared to a bald eagle. So they are around. Mm-hmm. And then, well, yes, there's a small gull that feeds near shore in large breakers. Is that typical of any species? Sorry, Linda, is that at this time of year or is that a summertime bird? And I've got a question about using my binoculars in my kayak. I have a pair of what do they call it? Eagle Optics 8x42 binoculars, which I do often carry in my kayak. I either carry my camera or my binoculars, but not usually both. And one of the key things is that some binoculars are waterproof and some binoculars carry a lifetime warranty. So if you get binoculars that do have both waterproof and lifetime warranty, then it's okay to take them on your kayak. But I do use my binoculars.
Mike, I just Googled about cormorants crossing land. Mm-hmm. The double-crested is the only cormorant species you'll see flying over land or over our ferries. The Brandts and the Pelagics will only fly over water.
Oh, there you go.
So everybody's got that now?
So the double-crested is the only one that goes over land. Yep, that makes sense because they often nest inland. Mm-hmm. I think the Brandts and the Pelagic are definitely more typical ocean birds than the double-crested, which is seen in a lot of rivers and lakes and so on. There are so many good resources out there for birding. But you know, the eBird website that Dennis mentioned. You can go and choose where you are. You can choose explore an area. You can say, show me the birds that are found in Victoria, and then show me only pictures that are shown from Victoria at this time of year, and you can really get a good sense of what birds are available.
I think once this COVID business is sorted, we'll get back to the birding paddles. Mm-hmm. With if Daniel's still willing to do it. Yep. And that's a great way to learn.
Yep, there's definitely, well, we've been doing quite a bit of birding on our small, relaxed and light paddles, but and Linda, I see, mentioned seeing some dunlin. We did see I saw some dunlin on the Christmas bird count as well. So there definitely are some of those. They're more of a migratory bird, the dunlin.
Yeah, it's interesting to note because of COVID for the last year, birding around the world has spiked significantly. Like in a lot of countries around the world, it's up 300-400%. So a lot of people getting out there, getting outdoors and chasing down birds. It's good fun.
Yeah, I for sure have not spent as much time looking at British Columbia birds as I have in the last year. I should be looking at penguins.
Well, Mike and Dennis, this was a great presentation. I just want to thank you for putting so much work into it. The photographs are excellent. We're going to have to see if we can let everybody know how they can access this, because it's going to be a great resource for referring back to after we go out and try to identify these birds. Just excellent. So I'm sure we'll be able to use this for for a lot of situations to come. So once again, thanks very much to both of you.
Thanks, Barry. I have one more quick question here from Morley about shearwaters. And shearwaters, hardly ever see them in the inside waters, but I see them a lot sailing, say, from Vancouver Island up to Haida Gwaii or up into the Central Coast. But I don't see sooty shearwaters or pink-footed shearwaters around Victoria very much.
Melissa Anderson's posted something in case people aren't looking at the chat, that the Victoria Natural History Society, which is a great organization for a very cheap price, they have a birding section along with marine section with some very good talks. And there are various birding groups around town where they do start like at Cattle Point, and they do marine birds as part of their morning walk. Yeah.
Yeah, there's I think a Tuesday and a Saturday birding that they organize, and quite often go to Cattle Point, which is great. So anyway, well, thank you everybody, and thank you Barry for organizing, and thank you Alan for managing the background there.
You're most welcome, and the recording will be posted up on the YouTube channel, which is on our website under General Interest Presentation Videos, and we'll probably send out a link. Thanks, guys.
All right. Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Happy birding.
Bye.
Thanks again.